This is the iconic face of Aoni, the titular antagonist of a horror game released in 2008. If you're anything like me, you are all too familiar with RPG Maker and the iconic titles that came out of it in the early 2010s, including Mad Father, The Crooked Man, and The Witch's House, to name a few. But despite each of those games garnering millions of views through gameplays posted to YouTube, Aoni grew to be the biggest franchise of them all, thanks to its particularly positive reception in Japan. I consider myself pretty well versed with RPG Maker games because I am obsessed with the pixelated style and also just feel really nostalgic for anything I was interested in when I was 14, but I had no idea just how huge Aoni is. There are 2 live-action films, 1 animated film, a short anime series, several novels, and a couple of sequels to the original game. Honestly, Aoni was never a favorite of mine, at least when it comes to the story, which is what I find most valuable to a fulfilling gameplay experience. But I felt like I was missing out on something that everyone else was seeing, so I decided to dig into the franchise a little bit to try to get a comprehensive understanding of the lore and also just break down what elements of the game made it so successful. The original Aoni game follows 4 students investigating rumors of a monster living in an abandoned mansion. There's Hiroshi, who we play as, Takashi, Mika, and Takuro. While everyone is a little unnerved about their environment, Hiroshi claims the scientific impossibility of a monster existing and sets out to prove it when he hears a loud noise sound from another room. It's only a plate that somehow fell to the ground, but when Hiroshi goes back to explain what happened, the front door is locked, all of his friends have disappeared, and the game officially begins. Most of our time is spent exploring the mansion, collecting keys to various locked rooms, and solving meticulously constructed puzzles. In a wardrobe on the 2nd floor, we find Takashi, frozen and traumatized by something he can't explain. It doesn't take long for us to figure out what he must have seen, because shortly after Hiroshi finds a key to and unlocks the library, we have our first encounter with the Aoni. The monster is very real and is the sole reason I think this game was as successful as it was. Visually, the Oni's design is so unsettling, and I understand that through our 2023 brains it looks a little silly, but if you can just visualize with me that we're back in 2008, before Five Nights at Freddy's or Until Dawn or Resident Evil 7, which is the best one in my opinion, the design for the Oni felt a lot more terrifying. While the students are depicted with the pixelated graphics to be expected from RPG Maker and as anime whenever we see their talking heads communicate with each other, the Oni doesn't fall into either of those categories. Instead, its head seems to be that of a real person's distorted photograph, which ends up feeling borderline Uncanny Valley and is subsequently very successful in being pretty disturbing. On top of that, whenever you're chased by the Oni, it's accompanied by this deep, ascending vocalization paired with screechy strings that I'm not describing very well, so I'll just play it. They actually kept the chase music in the live action film, so clearly this song, which is the only music we ever hear, is one of the quintessential aspects of the game. Hiroshi runs from the monster, and once the chase is over, goes back to solving puzzles, the most iconic of which involves wiping the blood off of piano keys to get a code. He does eventually find Mika and Takuro, but decides to keep looking for an exit on his own. Shortly after, we hear a scream, and upon investigation, find the Aoni hunched over Mika's body, feeding on her. More puzzles and problem solving, yada yada, and we find Takashi again. Upset with himself for suggesting a visit to the mansion, he runs out of the room and hangs himself in another. Soon after, we find the only surviving friend, Takuro, hiding in a wardrobe with a twisted ankle. Hiroshi discovers a way out and goes back for Takuro, but the Oni destroys the exit before they can use it. Another chase ensues, and when Takuro can't keep up, Hiroshi leaves him behind. In search of another exit, Hiroshi finds his way to a second building to explore. one that looks a lot dingier than the mansion, but also has a lot of interesting rooms. One, for example, is a small church with an intricate altar inside. Of course, there are more puzzles to complete, including one that moves the altar, allowing Hiroshi to climb down to the basement. There, he finds a dungeon and what seems like a makeshift hospital room. I'm noting this because we can kind of put together a story with a lot of imagination. There are a lot of theories about how the Aoni came to be, but the one that I lean towards is the idea that someone had a sick child who died in this house and decided to use the altar to perform a resurrection spell that ended up conjuring the blue demon, which in turn hijacked the kid's body. Also, the only reason I think a child was involved specifically is because of the random scribbles we see in various rooms that are pretty juvenile. Further in the basement, Hiroshi finds a large jail cell full of Aonis, each with different body types and styles. One of them manages to open the cell and chase Hiroshi to the door, which is stuck and takes a lot to open again. This is one of the more memorable moments of the game, in my opinion, since we are not only let in on the idea that multiple different Onis exist, but we also can't easily run from them like we can throughout the rest of the game, creating a particularly tense and unsettling few seconds. Hiroshi does manage to evade the Oni's grasp yet again, and when he enters the room a second time, all of the Onis are gone. There's never really an explanation for this, but regardless, Hiroshi can now enter the cell to solve a puzzle. When he does, however, Takuro suddenly appears behind him, unharmed. Pretty naively, Hiroshi lets Takuro tag along. In another moment I find particularly memorable, we open the menu to grab an item for a puzzle to find that Takuro has transformed into an Oni. This is such a subtle yet effective scare because of all the places you'd expect to be jump scared by the Oni, the game's interface is not one. Also, this isn't something I've mentioned before because I kind of wanted to talk about it towards the end, but whenever someone dies, they transform into an Oni, whether it's self-inflicted like Takuro or at the hands of the original Aoni like Mika. It's not explained why, but my best guess is that there's some sort of spiritual Oni virus that plagues anyone who's encountered the monster. So no matter how you die, the Oni latches onto you once it happens. What I would be really interested to find out is if the virus is limited to the mansion grounds, or if, for example, Hiroshi dies an old man somewhere far away, would he be transformed into an Oni? Since he's been in the house and is, in theory, already affected? Regardless, Hiroshi finishes the last puzzle and escapes. In the final cutscene, we see an older man, who is actually Mika's father, trying to run from the Aoni to no avail. For the first and only time, we see a victim from the Oni's perspective, which reveals its heat vision before attacking. And the game ends. Like I mentioned before, there are a couple of sequels, but they're all essentially just the same game in a different location. Aoni 2 takes place in an abandoned school, and Aoni 3 is on an abandoned island, which is overrun with Onis. Both games follow the same 4 students from the original, and don't provide a lot of interesting exposition. Plus, they're both mobile games that you have to play in portrait mode the entire time, so I can't say I recommend playing them unless you are a true Aoni fanatic, and they're out there. There are also so many fan-made games that try to expand on the lore and feature various designs for the monsters, but I'm only going to talk about officially licensed Aoni media because this video is definitely going to be long enough. I also think it's worth mentioning that the original Aoni game is the only one that the creator No Props made. Aside from giving the okay to any other games or books or anything else to be published, I don't think they actually had a hand in the creation of anything. And I bring that up because I think it helps explain why the franchise is so huge. It kind of feels like a Hello Kitty situation. I'm sure you've noticed that Hello Kitty is everywhere, and essentially every product that you could imagine has an officially licensed Hello Kitty version. Most of them don't make a lot of sense, but bring money to Sanrio at the end of the day, so they just approve a bunch of stuff. I just feel like that's what's going on here to a lesser degree, and I don't really feel any particular way about it. I just thought it was an interesting parallel to point out. So, the first film was released in 2014 and follows the same 4 students, Hiroshi, Takashi, Mika, and Takuro, plus 2 more students, Shun and Anna. There are a lot of similarities to the game, like certain puzzles, but the narrative itself is drastically different. Takuro is a sociopathic bully who drove Anna's brother to kill himself and now targets Shun. To cope, Shun created Aoni, the video game, in which Takuro is a character that can be killed by a monster. One day, Takuro goes to an abandoned house on the outskirts of town with the intention of discarding this random box inside, and one way or another, the remaining 5 characters follow behind. Somehow, whatever happens inside mirrors Shun's game, including the monster that tries to kill everyone. And speaking of which, I can't say I'm as impressed with the design. Somehow the Oni looks a lot cornier as a 3D model, and is also animated in a way that is comically bad at points. The film flopped pretty hard and had a horrible reception. I think the acting already is horrendous, but the design of the Oni is what really mattered, and it just did not live up to the original at all, and the bar was low. Anyway, both Takashi and Mika are killed by the Oni, and once they're dead, they're dead. There's no Oni virus floating around like there is in the original game. As we reach the climax of the film, Anna confronts Takuro about her brother's suicide, and while they're distracted, Shun looks inside the box Takuro brought with him to reveal his own dead body inside. Apparently, Shun was killed by Takuro, and Anna was the only character able to see and interact with his ghost. Although the way this twist is revealed is pretty underwhelming, I'll give it props for being something I didn't expect. Now that she knows the truth, Takuro plans to kill Anna, but is killed by the Oni first. Hiroshi then sacrifices himself for Anna to escape, and once she does, it's revealed that this was all a dream, and Anna has one more chance to save Shun from Takuro. The second film, much like the games, is more of a reimagining of the first film than a sequel. It features the same characters, as well as the meta concept of the Aoni game being linked to the real house, but this time, Shun and Anna watch the events unfold from Takashi's live stream, safe in Shun's bedroom. Clearly, Aoni 2.0 was seen by the filmmakers as a way to sort of redeem the franchise's reputation, but as far as I know, reception was pretty much the same. There are 6 Aoni novels, the first of which was released in 2013, and because it provides the basis for the film, I don't really feel like I need to re-explain the plot. Something I do want to point out is how all of the characters, including the Aoni, are depicted in the same anime style. I feel like it kind of dulls the creepiness of the monster when it looks almost cutesy, so I don't think that was the best decision to make. As for the lore, we actually learn through the novels the origin story of the Aoni. So, a few decades before the events of the original game takes place, a family moves into this mansion, and in the basement, the 2 young daughters find a box which has blue beetles enclosed inside. They open up the box, one of them gets possessed by the Aoni demon, and in turn goes to kill her mother and sister, and that's how it all started. I feel like my theory was a little better and kind of tied together the environment design, but regardless, it's nice to sort of finally get some answers as to how Aoni came to be in the first place. Also, there are a set of Aoni Junior novels floating around which follow the same characters, of course, but they are elementary school children. I feel like the spin-off babies trope is kind of the natural course of action for any popular series, so I can't say I'm exactly surprised. That is all I really have to say about the novels. It's actually pretty difficult to find the English version of any Aoni media apart from the original game, so if you've actually read the novels, I would love to hear your opinion on them. Alright, so the last thing I want to talk about is Aoni the Blue Monster, which is an anime series adaptation of the original game, which in turn only includes the 4 original students. The show ran from 2016 to 2017 and is incredibly short with only 13 episodes. That seems like a lot, but excluding the intro and end credits, each episode is only about a minute and a half long. Although the anime loosely follows the events of the game, it largely is a parody. There is no attempt at any real scares or taking itself too seriously, which actually makes it pretty enjoyable to watch and officially has my stamp of approval. I do recommend you watch the series because I'm not going to go super in depth about everything that happens, but here are a couple of my favorite episodes. In episode 2, Takashi, who's shaking with fear, starts to create electricity, which Hiroshi, Takuro, and Mika use to power the entire mansion. They even call a power company in hopes of profiting off of the Takashi power plant instead of calling for help, of course. Eventually, Takashi starts to burn, which causes the Aoni to calmly walk into the room, disconnect him, pour barbecue sauce on him, and feast. In episode 4, we get insight into the Oni's daily routine, which includes cooking his victims and setting up puzzles. This episode also insinuates that the iconic chase music is actually Aoni singing, which genuinely does provide food for thought because there's no solid explanation about where the music comes from. In the series finale, episode 13, all of the characters have been trapped in the house for 70 years. Everyone, including the Onis, are super old and slow and on the brink of death. Mika, Takuro, Hiroshi, and Takashi all die of old age and immediately turn into Onis, just as a new young couple is about to enter the house. If you need any more incentive to go watch the series, there's an episode where Mika tries and fails to confess her love to Takuro. There's another one where the guys try to watch Mika shower naked, and there's also one where the roles between the Onis and their victims are reversed, all of which are pretty entertaining. Just stuff like that, so I recommend it as a palate cleanser if you decide to put yourself through watching the Aoni films. With that being said, that is all that I have. Aoni, as a franchise, is definitely carried by its fan base. I wouldn't consider it to be the best horror game out there, and I certainly wouldn't even consider it to be the best RPG Maker horror game out there, but part of me is happy that some RPG Maker horror game got this level of success because I just really love all of the games and I'm happy to see that other people enjoy them as well. These games were such a huge part of my adolescent years and I definitely plan on making a video about all of my favorites, so that is something you can expect to see from me in the future. In the meantime, I would love to hear your opinions about all of this, and I am not exactly sure how to end the video, so I'm just gonna end it. Bye.